Hello, 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 and welcome to Inner Work for Greater Good. My name, as always, is Emily Eldridge. I am the founder and CEO of Change Light, where we're here to change light the world, to help you do inner work that accelerates your power to make a difference and really light up the world and be your fullest self. That's why the show is called Inner Work for Greater Good, because it's not just about doing inner work and, feeling better just for one's own sake, but that when we do, that accelerates and enhances our ability to be a better presence for others, no matter where we are in the world, in life. So today is a topic that I want to talk about. This, as always, has come up. Recently, I had a conversation that was very similar to another conversation I'd had with someone a few months ago. And both of these people that I'm going to refer to, obviously, I won't refer to them by name, but both of them came to me, or at least came into my life and described situations in which someone, let me start with the first person. Okay, so she's this dear old friend of mine. She's running a nonprofit, and she was talking about how the leader or the founder of that nonprofit talking about the woman's behaviors and how, she's part of this society set and she's very well known and everything. Everyone thinks she's so wonderful and she does all these things to raise money for the organization, but that behind closed doors, or basically to the staff in the nonprofit, she's horrible. She's mean, she gaslights, she attacks, she criticizes, she's always finding fault. They always feel like they're having to walk on eggshells with her. She's very unpredictable. She's fake. It's all this stuff. So the point is, it's the contrast between the way she's perceived in the outside world by her fellow philanthropists versus the way the staff in the not-for-profit experiences her is completely different. She's seen as this angel to the rest of the world, but a devil, in the organization. And then the other, or a woman who I recently met and I'm mentoring now, she has taken on a new organization in an African country. And basically what had happened was the organization had been co-founded, and they're helping children in this African country. And that it had been co-founded by this woman who's here in the United States and this man who is a man from that country to help children. And they co-founded it together. But basically what happened was that the woman from the United States had basically found a way to maintain control of, the messaging, the communication, the donors, and that when she and the co-founder were at odds because of their outlook on the organization, and I'm not going to go into specifics because I really don't want to reveal too much, but the point is that she basically, she didn't like this approach, which was the original intention of the organization, and so she basically just pulled out and got all of her fellow donors to pull out. And then they started another organization that's doing something very similar. And they basically stolen all of the details from the previous organization, but they're just calling themselves something else. And what ended up happening was all these kids who prior to that had been, supported in their education and in other endeavors, basically all that money just disappeared. And those kids were left in the lurch in this other country. So then the point is, I'm showing you these two examples because what I ended up explaining to both of these women at these different times when I was presented with this is that what it sounded to me like they were that they'd been dealing with and were dealing with was someone who is what's called a communal narcissist. Now, if you're not familiar with narcissism, I highly recommend learning about it, but I'm sharing it on the channel right now because I think it's extremely important for those of us who are do-gooders. Obviously, I'm about inner work for greater good. Well, in that endeavor to do greater good and to help others and to make life better for people, besides just ourselves, we can run into what are called communal narcissists. Now, in the description, I actually provided a couple of videos, one by Dr. Ramani, who is an expert on narcissism. She does tons of videos on YouTube about communal narcissists. and communal narcissism, and then another one by Dr. Phil. And part of what I like about his video too, in addition to Dr. Ramani's, is that he calls these gala narcissists. And if you have ever spent any time in certain sets of society, the sort of higher echelons or the moneyed society, there are galas where people will spend thousands and thousands of dollars just to have a plate, or a table in support of an organization. But as much as they might seem like, oh, well, we're giving all this money, really it's more about their own self-aggrandizement and being able to be perceived as somehow selfless and wonderful and superior and kind and generous to the people around them. And so that is the essence of a communal narcissist. And narcissism is just, I'm not an expert, I've just studied it a lot, but narcissism is basically characterized by a lack of empathy for others, and also a selfishness, self-absorption. And so what's interesting and different about communal narcissists and self-aggrandizement, although there's other kinds, there's grandiose narcissists and there are other kinds. A communal narcissist is typically one of the grandiose narcissists. And I'm going to read from an article, and I'll also include the link there just so that we can go through some of the details. But the reason why I'm sharing this with you is because so often in do-gooder organizations, in not-for-profits, in NGOs, in philanthropic circles, in community organizations, in spiritual organizations, in churches and other spiritual groups, we can run into communal narcissists. And I am going to guess that those of you watching have probably dealt with some, whether you realize it or not. And my hope by sharing this information is to help you learn to discern between someone who is genuinely doing something because they care, because they want to make a difference, or they really genuinely want to spread good messages and have genuinely have impact, versus those who are doing it for their own self-aggrandizement. And too often there are too many communal narcissists, frankly, in these do-gooder communities. And so when we can recognize and start to discern between who's genuinely, altruistic or kind or generous versus someone who's just doing it for their own sake, it's good for us to recognize that so that we can learn how to deal with that person, or frankly, remove ourselves. Because part of the thing with communal narcissists is that oftentimes they inflict narcissistic abuse, which is a kind of abuse that we suffer when, if we're under the thumb of a narcissist or we've been manipulated by someone who's a narcissist. So first of all, let me go through some of the elements of this type of narcissism. So I'm going to show, hold on one second here. I'm going to read just some notes that I wrote from this article that I've included in the description. So communal narcissists present themselves as altruistic, caring, and extremely community minded. So this is that dichotomy between narcissism. So we often think of just narcissism as like, well, I'm just all about me, and that's how they come across, that all narcissists come across that way. But this is where communal narcissists actually get their narcissistic supply from being seen as good. And so they seem selfless, but it's really all about trying to serve their own interests. So communal narcissists seek admiration and validation through their perceived contributions to others, the community, or society. But here's the key: it's about perception, not the truth. They want to be seen as benevolent and saintly, but that is not necessarily based on reality. The truth doesn't matter to them if other people believe their facade. So it's about maintaining that facade to others, which is why when I described that first example, you have that contrast with that woman who's a gala narcissist, as Dr. Phil would likely call her, between the way she behaved externally versus the way she actually treated her staff. And it was a similar situation in the second example that I gave, where I don't know the woman, so I don't know this for sure, but from what I understand, she's being perceived as this angel to these African children by her friends here in the United States. But meanwhile, she pulled out all her funding on the kids. She didn't seem to care about them. She was only judging them based on certain metrics, as opposed to really caring about them as humans, and then didn't seem to care when she just pulled out all the funding and got all of her friends to pull out all their funding, leaving these other people, the kids, suffering. So anyway, it's about perception, not the truth. So to the world, Communal narcissists portray an image of kindness, compassion, and honesty, but at their core, they are just like the grandiose narcissist, attention seeking, entitled, antagonistic, and even cruel. They consider themselves as unique and special and want the world to believe they're the best listener, friend, mother, volunteer, etc. And they satisfy those narcissistic needs, that supply or that fuel, as some people call it, by being perceived as superior, grandiose, and powerful in the communal domain. So in any sort of communal or community, group setting. But their facade only serves as a mean to get power. So once they have that power, they can drop the pretense and focus on themselves rather than acting as though they actually care about others. Here's another thing. This is another telltale sign for identifying a communal narcissist, that when they do something charitable, they want the world to know about it. There's no use to them in doing something good unless others see it and praise them for being selfless and generous. So think about the people that you may have dealt with in your volunteer organizations. Maybe you're in a nonprofit, maybe you're running an NGO, maybe, whatever the deal is, or even in your church or your synagogue or your mosque or wherever, or even any new agey organization, any kind of thing where there's also a spiritual element, that you might actually have seen this huge split between the way they're perceived or the way they want to be perceived versus the actual behaviors that you see behind closed doors, the manipulations. And so let's go on to this, manipulative behaviors. Communal narcissists also use manipulative tactics, but are often hidden behind false modesty, kindness, and generosity. They often use those as tools to manipulate others. So this is where there's a sinister element to this, because they're pretty good at tricking people and making them think that no, they're not narcissistic. They're actually very humble. For example, they might give you gifts and compliments to win your favor and get you to do what they want. They might make you feel guilty for not showing them enough appreciation for all the wonderful things they do for you and for others. Or they might gaslight you if you question them in any way. And you can often tell gaslighting when you see something as true, like this is what actually happened, but then the other person just denies it and tries to convince you that your perception of reality is wrong. It's a form of manipulation. It's very sinister, and it's a form of abuse. You may feel like you're walking on eggshells because their mood can change quickly and drastically. Your confidence and perception of reality may have been affected badly by constantly being gaslit, lied to, and otherwise abused. So here's where we're going to give some examples of where communal narcissists can show up, because they can show up in different environments. So for example, a colleague at work might portray themselves as pro-social and generous, but behind your back, they gossip and they aggressively dominate every meeting and conversation. Their actions do not match up with their words. They act as though they have everyone's best interest at heart, but really they only have their own interests at heart. So that's something to notice, even, and this is where I'm speaking to you as I'm speaking to myself as well as to you, because I've run into these people where, you think it's kind of a mind game where you're like, yeah, but they seem so nice, but they seem so generous, but they do such good. And it's like, but something's not quite right, or something just doesn't match up. And you realize that, oh, wait, this is all a manipulation. So it's really important to recognize this. In friends, your friend may involve in charitable causes or volunteering and promote their altruism and generosity on social media, for example. However, in private, they are unkind, selfish, and or exploitative. You might know the public image they are portraying is false, and in the reality, they only care about themselves. But you also know they would react badly if you questioned or criticized them. That's a great telltale sign too, that if you push back or you say, I don't know, that just seemed like it wasn't quite, authentic or whatever. And if you get a pretty severe reaction or any kind of manipulation or gaslighting, that can be a good sign that you might be dealing with narcissism in that person. Parent This is very common, sadly, where you have a parent who presents themselves to the world as the most supportive and caring parent in the world, but at home it's a totally different story. They're abusive, they're mean, they're critical, they're dismissive, they're neglectful, etc. My grandmother had a term actually for basically, you could say, in a way, it was her way of saying a communal narcissist, and I don't think she came up with this, but it's angel, street angel, house devil. Street angel, house devil, perceived as an angel on the street, but really at home they're not. They're terrible, they're mean, they're critical, etc. And then I've already referred to this spiritual narcissism. This is something to be very, very, very careful of, because I've seen too many people abused by spiritual narcissists. So spiritual narcissism falls under the umbrella of communal narcissism because it describes a narcissistic individual choosing the moralistic domain to feed their narcissistic needs, right? So there are plenty of wonderful, fantastic spiritual leaders or, mentors or priests or whatever, who genuinely care about their constituents and genuinely can care about their communities. But then there are those who seem like they care, but they're actually trying to manipulate, or they get some weird gratification from the power the sense of power they derive from others looking to them for guidance, etc. So spiritual narcissists believe that they are more spiritual than others. They feel they need to share and show off their spiritual growth with other people, for example, on social media. I will just throw in here, I've run into some of the spiritual narcissism in some of the groups that I was in years and years ago when I was in some, healing groups. And they're wonderful, absolutely wonderful, fantastic people I met. But at the same time, I always felt this like weird feeling when I would see someone who was just so sort of enthralled with their own, their own like energetic, levels that they'd achieved, or the meditations they were doing, or the way they would wear their clothes as though they were kind of playing a character almost. It always kind of bothered me. And now I realize that there might have been some narcissism going on there, some spiritual narcissism. So in typically narcissistic style, these people need constant praise and admiration for being spiritually advanced or being able to do a particularly difficult yoga pose. You see, there's a need for like supply from that kind of behavior or fuel. However, they are, and despite their spiritual facade, they are entitled and arrogant, with a tendency to become hostile and aggressive when faced with criticism. If you've spent any time watching, for example, some of the documentaries like NXIVM, about NXIVM, that cult, and some other organizations, or Scientology, that when you watch those, you see that they're always led by narcissists, and sometimes they're full-on sociopaths or psychopaths. But that the point is, they derive their fuel and their power from the admiration of their followers. And they do all these sometimes overt, but oftentimes covert tactics to manipulate their followers into doing really, really horrible things to others, to their fellow human beings. So it's something to look out for whenever you're part of a group, is just be aware of when you might be running into that kind of personality. So what do you do? All right, I'm going to wrap this up with what do you do when you are dealing with a communal narcissist, or a narcissist of any kind, to be honest with you. The most important thing you can do is set your boundaries. Part of the problem with that, I'll just put it this way, is that oftentimes narcissists will prey on people who don't have boundaries, or who are very well-intentioned and genuinely really good. And so narcissists, those of us who are genuinely altruistic and caring and want to make a difference, can sometimes be easy prey for these people. And so that's where it's important for us to have this discernment about what are this person's true intentions, what's really going on, and am I dealing with someone who is truly genuine in their motivations, or are they actually just trying to elevate themselves, or it's just for their own self-aggrandizement or narcissistic fuel. So setting boundaries, once you realize what you're dealing with, setting boundaries, I've said this many times, that's a whole huge conversation. But basically, it's a matter of recognizing the manipulation that's going on, recognizing that the way they're presenting themselves is not reality, and limiting your interactions with them to the point of even full on disconnecting if you need to. I am not sitting here counseling anyone here to go so far as that, because I don't know your unique situation. You only know your unique situation. But the point is that there is no point in trying to change a narcissist, trying to appeal to their empathy, trying to even tell them that they're narcissistic, trying to convince them to think or feel or act otherwise. There is no point. I am telling you right now, it is just not worth your time and energy. I know this from experience. I know this from study. I know this from watching other people struggle for decades to appeal to redeem, to connect with whatever the narcissist in their lives. It doesn't effing work. It's not going to work as much as you want it to, as much as you might deeply desire that connection, or deeply desire for them to see the error of their ways, or to, turn themselves around, whatever it is. Don't bother, because part of the thing about narcissism is that anytime it's a self-defense mechanism. Ultimately, it is like extremely powerful defense mechanism. And so anytime, and actually from my own work, you can understand this when we talk about defenders, is that anytime you might try to break through that defense mechanism is going to pop up, and it's going to just keep reinforcing what the narcissist thinks about themselves. They're going to end up projecting onto you, or they're going to attack you so as not to receive any of the criticism or feedback that you might be trying to give them, etc. So you're just going to keep running into their inner defenders, to their blocks, to their defense mechanisms. There's just no point. And I know that can be really hard, especially if you're dealing with someone who, let's say, as a parent, who might be showing the signs of communal narcissism, is that it can be really, really, really hard. But part of another element of narcissism is lack of self-awareness, lack of self-reflection. But I will say this too, though, that's the funny thing, especially about certain kinds of communal narcissists, like let's say a new agey or spiritual narcissist, is that oftentimes they think they're being self-aware, they think they're being self-reflective. It's not up to you to change their minds. It's up to you to know what's right for you, and to know what's healthy for you, and to set your boundaries with those people, and to remove yourself if necessary. Now, I'm going to throw in here something that can tend to happen, especially if, like, for example, and this happened in the first example of the woman that I shared with, where she realized, she was just suffering so much under this woman's direction of this not-for-profit. And finally, when we talked about, I was explaining all this to her, she said, well, I think I think I'll stay, just because, we are doing good things for the kids. They were doing other things for other children in this first organization I mentioned. But the problem is that's a rationalization for putting up with abuse. So and it's very natural. I'm not criticizing her. This is a natural thing that we often do, especially when it comes to do-gooding and wanting to make a difference. And then if you realize that you're dealing with a narcissist, a communal narcissist, narcissistic abuse, we can tend to rationalize our choice to stay in the situation because, well, I'm helping people, well, or she's making a difference, or what have you. But I guarantee you, there are good people in the world doing great things, and they're not doing it narcissistically. They're doing it genuinely, with good intentions and healthy boundaries and healthy approaches. And so in order to do good in the world let me put it this way, doing good in the world does not require you to put up with abuse, period. And if anything, that's one of the main themes of my work, is that oftentimes those of us who want to do good in the world, or are doing good in the world, can often do it under suffering, like that we're suffering internally, or we're suffering in our circumstances. But it's not about suffering. It does no good if you're suffering while you're trying to help people who are suffering. The best way to help someone is from a place of clarity and peace and strength, and your own inner light and joy and truth. And so, while it may be tempting to want to rationalize your, staying in a situation in which you're dealing with a communal narcissist, it's of course up to you, but I just want to, put that out there and say, hey, be aware of if you are trying to rationalize or justify putting up with abuse. Okay. So other than that, go ahead, watch the videos. Dr. Ramani explains it in actually three-part video. She explains it, and the link is in the show notes. And then Dr. Phil, really powerful stuff. And then the article that I read from is also in there. This is such an important thing. I feel so passionately when it comes to narcissism, because I've suffered some narcissistic abuse and other people have, way worse than I have. I've mostly just observed it, but I've dealt with some. And it's just really extremely important that we recognize the narcissists in our lives, and especially those of us who are so passionate about making a difference and doing good in the world. It is absolutely vital that we recognize the healthy actors versus the unhealthy actors. And my opinion, that we ally ourselves as fully as possible with the healthy actors, because that's how you're going to create more health in the world. It doesn't serve anyone to be unhealthy while you're trying to make other people healthy. We've got to be healthy ourselves in order to make the greatest possible difference and do the greatest good. All right. I hope this has been helpful. I hope this has been educational. As always, I'm Emily at changelight.world. And also I've got free program, free community at changelight.world. Check us out. And I've got a podcast, Dark Light Truth, where you can hear people experience my amazing drawing out process in which we permanently heal things like inner critics and inner wounds, wounded inner children, and all those things that, other approaches take a long time to heal, but we can heal them in just a few hours. Pretty cool. All right. Thank you so much. I hope you're well, and I will see you next week.